Oasis is back, people. Oasis is back. I never thought I was going to be saying those words, but they're going to perform live together again. Not only that, but apparently Liam confirmed on Twitter that we're going to get a new album. It was very vague. I don't know if he was being serious about it because he tends to be very sarcastic, you know. When the band announced that we're going to get back together, I had my doubts, mainly because we all know how terrible their relationship was. Usually bands start at a really happy place. They all love to play with each other, and there's like this wonderful atmosphere surrounding the albums and the recording sessions. But with Oasis, from the get-go, it was really bad. Like the tension inside the studio, the constant clashes of ego inside the band, especially between Liam and Noel. Obviously, it wasn't really looking very good. They weren't together for the longest time, but in the time they were together, they released some of the best Britpop albums ever, and that is exactly the reason why today we have a new episode of the Overrated series, where we take your favorite artists and ask the question, are they overrated? To do this, I use 4 different categories: popularity, influence, performance, and discography. Based on their performance in each category, I decide whether or not they're overrated at the very end of the video. And yes, I said I decide. This is only going to be my personal opinion. I'm pretty sure you guys will have your own. So why don't you go ahead and leave it down below in the comments, and I'll make sure to read it and give you my opinion on your opinion. There is quite a lot to say about the band in each category, and I don't really want this video to be that long, so let's go on with the first category, popularity. And when it comes to popularity, this is probably going to be the easiest category. I mean, we're talking about a band that sold more than 75 million copies, as one of the best-selling albums of all time, in the form of What's the Story, Morning Glory. I think the last time I checked, the record was at 12 million copies sold, and now that the band is getting back together, that's probably going to go all the way up to 13 and maybe 14, which is going to make it inside the top 50 or 40 best-selling albums ever. Definitely maybe is also one of the fastest and highest-selling albums in the history of the UK, so I think in terms of sales, it's pretty safe to say that the band is not overrated. And I think that when you look at all the fuss that people are making out of the band's comeback, even when the tour is not even a worldwide tour, it's only in the UK, it's not even going to be televised, you know, when they didn't formally announce an album, new music, I think that's also a clear evidence that the band's popularity is off the charts. We're talking about one of the most popular British bands since the Beatles, and that is a huge statement, considering the 80s were a really good decade for music in terms of popularity too. I know that after Be Here Now, the albums didn't really sell that well. That says more about the quality of the albums other than the band's popularity overall. I know that a lot of you, especially if you're from America, you'll argue that there were a lot of bands in the 90s that were more popular than Oasis, but you have to understand that Oasis's popularity extends overseas. You know, it doesn't only stay in the US and the UK, it goes to Latin America, even Australia, you know, so the band's not overrated in terms of popularity. There's no way. Influence is a little more complicated because you do have to break it down. It's clear that Oasis wasn't overrated at all when it comes to the influence they had on the pop rock genre in the 2000s, influencing people like Coldplay, Radiohead, Arctic Monkeys, The Killers, Always, which is a band that released one of my favorite albums from this present decade, Blue Rep. It's clear that Oasis has a very solid influence in the music industry, especially when you look at the British pop and pop rock genre in the 2000s and 2010s. But Oasis had multiple problems back in the 90s when they were first starting because their sound wasn't really anything new. When I go back to some of the other albums in the early 90s and the late 80s, and even when you go to the 70s, you'll find a lot of bands that were doing something pretty similar to what Oasis was doing, you know, and even though that's nothing to be ashamed about because music is all about influence, you know, every single artist you listen to probably based this music out of someone else's, you know, there's nothing wrong with that. But I feel like when people say that Oasis is one of the most groundbreaking bands of the 90s, or they introduced a new type of rock style, I don't really think that's true. I think they were band contemporary, and prior to Oasis, they were already doing something very similar to what they were doing. I'm not trying to take credit away from their amazing ability to write music and perform it. I think that's the stronghold of Oasis as a band. But in terms of influence, even though a lot of people tried to mimic the style of the band and how they wanted to bring rock stars back into the mainstream, I believe that in terms of music, which is what I talk about in this channel, they weren't really that influential. You know, they didn't bring anything new to the table. Feel free to disagree with me in the comment section. Once again, the main point of these videos is for you guys to interact through the comments and give me your opinion and maybe even educate me on something I may not be as informed as I possibly could. But when people talk about Noel as this groundbreaking, forward thinking songwriter, I don't really know what they mean by that. I see much more influence in Liam, being the rock star that he was, his nasal vocals that we're going to be talking about in the next category, and his overall character. I think he was the proto version of a lot of the indie bands we had in the 2000s that kind of resemble that edgy style and cocky look. But apart from that, I have to say that I've never been on board with this idea that says that Oasis is one of the most forward-thinking bands ever, and that is the reason why, in terms of influence, I will say they're slightly overrated. If there's one category where the band is clear and safe from any danger of being overrated, I would say that is performance, because the guitar playing in the albums is always on point. I love the drumming, I love the bass lines, but most importantly, Liam Gallagher is one of my favorite performers of all time, and I'm not even kidding. I know that a lot of people say that he's quite overrated. I've seen people saying that he's a one-trick pony. He always sings the same tune with a different melody. He always tends to use the same type of nasal vocals. And I agree, I'm not here trying to argue that Liam Gallagher is one of the most versatile vocalists out there, but I have to say that every time I listen to him sing, I feel the energy of rock and roll music filtering through his voice. He knows how to rock, and I think that was a defining factor that made albums like Definitely Maybe and Morning Glory so legendary. His performances, his ability to carry the track with his personality and charisma filtering through his voice. And even though I know that Noel has complained multiple times on interviews and even on books, saying that he was the one writing the songs, he was the one that came up with the ideas, he was 70% of Oasis, I believe that he tends to overlook the importance of his brother's singing abilities. Because once again, when you look at Noel Gallagher's solo stuff, then tell me what happened. If you were the talent of the band, you were the one making the most out of the compositions and your brother was just performing them, then tell me what happened in your solo discography. Why is it that none of your albums reached the same level of critical acclaim as your work with Oasis? Your brother was clearly the last piece of the puzzle, and in my opinion, the most important one, because I enjoy his solo stuff more than any of the Noel Gallagher albums with High Flying Birds. I do believe he's more talented as a musician overall, but in terms of rock music, I believe his brother is the representation of a rock star, and because of his performances, because of Noel's guitar playing, because of the amazing drumming and incredible bass lines and the style, the groove, the chemistry of the band, that's the reason why in terms of performance, I can't say that they're overrated. I mean, we're talking about one of the best live acts of the 2000s. Their live performances were incredible. I recommend for you guys to go on YouTube and find some of their live performances, because I'm telling you, they're even better than the studio version. So yeah, they're not overrated. Now let's go with discography, the last category we're going to be talking about today, and I have to say this is the most difficult one by far, because we have two of the best Britpop albums ever made, Morning Glory and Definitely Maybe. Definitely Maybe, in my opinion, one of the greatest albums of all time. The energy of that album, how timeless and classic it feels, is amazing. A lot of you may remember this album as something that didn't really happen that long ago, but when you think about the fact that this album was released 30 years ago, that's when you really start to reminisce and relive your memories with this album, especially now since we're getting a new version of the record, a legacy edition or something like that. I'm not sure. The problem is that after two of the best albums from the 90s and one of the best releases of all time, you have Be Here Now, which is not a bad album. I think the album is overhated. People tend to look at this album as a total failure when it wasn't really. It sold pretty well, and it has some really good songs by the band, like Stand By Me, Don't Go Away. But when compared to Morning Glory and Definitely Maybe, it's definitely a disappointment, especially because it seemed like the band was improving. Morning Glory is an overall better produced, better performed, and better written album. I think that the fact that it has a few songs that I didn't quite like is the only reason why I like Definitely Maybe a little bit more. So Be Here Now became one of the most anticipated albums of all time, and it did not deliver. And after that, you have Standing on the Shoulders of Giants, which is one of my least favorite releases by the band. I don't like that album one bit, and I know that there's a lot of defenders out there, but I just can't seem to find what's good about the album. You do have a few good releases like Heathen Chemistry. I'm sorry if I said that wrong, I probably did. I don't know how to pronounce that word. So it seems to me like the band never really achieved anything even close to what they did with Morning Glory and Definitely Maybe after Be Here Now, And even though I think that you should give those other albums a listen, you should definitely not skip it, especially if you like the first two, because because there's a lot of Oasis fans out there that like those albums and that defend those albums. And actually, there's some people that say that those albums are almost as great as definitely maybe in Morning Glory. I definitely disagree. I don't even find the albums to be on the same realm of quality as those first two releases. But, I don't really think you should just ignore them. But in terms of critical acclaim, sales, and my own personal opinion, it's pretty clear that the first two albums were the only legendary releases by the band. So based on that fact, I would say they're slightly overrated in terms of discography. And while there's an argument to be made that the first two releases are so great, they kind of cover the entirety of the band's discography, in my opinion, there's more mediocre albums than good ones in the band's discography, and that is the reason why I have to say that in terms of discography specifically, I do believe the band's a little overrated. People just tend to praise the rest of the band's discography way too much, and I don't think they deserve all the praise. They're not good albums, so yeah, a little bit overrated. You guys want to know a little fun fact about these videos? I never really know what the final conclusion is going to be. I do a bunch of research, I go back and listen to every single one of their albums, every single one of their songs, even the B-Sides album, The Master Plan. I go and revisit the entirety of the band's discography in order to give a precise and honest opinion on the band's legacy. And that is how I reach a conclusion at the end of the video. This is basically me giving an opinion on the band's performance in each category based on all the research I made. But I always kind of know what the conclusion is going to look like every time I start recording one of these videos, because I've done this with the Beatles, I've done this with Paul McCartney, Led Zeppelin, Ozzy Osbourne, and I love those bands. I know that I'm going to say they're not overrated. And I thought the same thing was going to happen with Oasis because I love Oasis. I enjoy their discography quite a lot. Even albums that I don't really like that much, I'm willing to accept that they're better than a lot of the other Britpop releases that, were going around in the 2000s and even nowadays, They're very well produced, very well performed, as I said, in the performance category. Even thinking about saying that the band was overrated was kind of like a crazy thought in my mind. But once I started to analyze their performance in each of these categories, I noticed that the amount of praise that the band gets for the rest of their discography outside of their work in the 90s is the reason why I'm kind of forced to say that the band is overrated, because I would love to look at those two records and say this is one of the best releases of all time. The band is clearly not overrated, but the problem is that when you look at what people are saying about the band, you'll find that a lot of them are saying this is one of the most influential bands of all time. They're not. They had a unique sound that was like nothing else in the 90s. They didn't. They sounded very similar to a lot of their contemporaries. And last but not least, people are saying that the band doesn't even have a single bad album in their catalog. This is not true. They have multiple. So I'm kind of forced to say, that the band is slightly overrated, even though I love their music. Definitely maybe is one of my favorite albums of all time. I listen to that album quite often, and now that the band is coming back and they're probably giving us a new album, I'm going to be listening to that album even more now, but I do have to say that people tend to exaggerate about the legacy, influence, and overall craft of the band. So I love them and I'm really happy they're back, and I'm pretty sure they're going to give us some amazing performances, but I do believe that they're slightly overrated. But this is only my personal opinion. I'm really excited to see what you guys have to say in the comments section. I had a lot of fun making this video, so if you had fun watching it, go ahead and leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any other videos that I upload. If you want me to talk about any other topics related to music, if you want me to check out a song, album, or artist, go ahead and leave it down below as well, and I'll make sure to read it and fulfill your request as soon as I can. Once again, hope that you enjoyed, and I hope that I can see you soon with a new video. But until then, bye.